Hello everyone, your boy Jeff, back with another video, and this is going to be another episode in my semi-irregular series called the Stephen King Reading Project. Got a couple of books to talk about here. I did make some progress since my last video, and it was easy when you're reading a book like The Green Mile, which is what I'm going to start with now. This had been on my reread list. I'm working my way through, and at the time this came out, this originally was published in those series of like six little thin little paperbacks. Like you got one a month, and then to get the next part of the story. I waited until the entire story was done, and then it was released as a single collection, which I got as a soft cover. This hardcover edition wasn't released until 2000, and I found a copy on eBay, so to replace my softcover collection with the hardcover, because I got to have it in hardcover when it comes to King. Hadn't read this since, I don't know, 90, 96, 97. So, and I hadn't seen the movie in forever either. I still want to rewatch the movie. That's on my to-do list. But this book got to be one of King's best of the 90s, if you ask me. Even though it's a serialized novel, the pieces, all the parts fit together pretty seamlessly. He starts them out all the same way with, the narrator in the present day, and gives you a little bit of what's going on in that story with his, present day life. And then we go back to the past when he was a prison guard at in the 1930s on death row, which, of course, where the Green Mile title comes from, which refers to the linoleum that's on the floor leading to the room where the electric chair is. And when you're on your way to that electric chair, you're walking the Green Mile, and that's the last walk you're ever going to take. I won't recap the story all that much. I'm assuming, most of you know the story here, whether through the movie or through the book. But as far as concise writing, as far as getting right to the point and not driving off into the weeds, so to speak, like King does at times, which I refer to. I think it was the serialization of the novel. Each part is like, 80 pages or 90 or 100 pages. It forces him to stay on track, forces him to keep the story moving, get to what he wants to say quickly, and I think this book is all the better for that. That's why I would say this is one of his best of the 90s. Now that I'm kind of starting to move into the late 80s, into the 90s with my reread. So, yeah. In the mid to late 90s, things were kind of going awry for King, in my opinion. I wasn't enjoying his books as much. This one, to me, was something of a comeback because the story is so good. The ending is so good. I mean, it's heartbreaking. It's, it's a little sentimental, but that's okay. You care so much about the characters by the end that it moves you. And this isn't necessarily a horror novel. It's more of a suspense with like one supernatural-ish element in it. You all know what that is. But in terms of his writing, you can't get much better than The Green Mile. This would be probably in my top 10 now that I've reread it. I would probably put this in the bottom half of my top 10 King books for sure. And I've never done a ranking. And believe me, I've thought long and hard about ranking all of his books. I think someday that will come. I want to reread a lot more of what I want to get through before I can sufficiently give a ranking to it. You know, I don't necessarily want to go off of a 25 or 30-year-old memory of a book. So reading this really refreshed my memory on the Green Mile. You know, I remember that I liked it, but I didn't really remember any of the specifics. And after reading this, my opinion has only grown more for this book. So enjoyed it a lot. It's one of his best, if you ask me. And I don't know if you want to get it in the separate parts and the little paperbacks or get it as a collection, but whichever way you do, it's definitely worth the read, and it gets one of my highest recommendations when it comes to King. Then I started the next book after this, which I'll get to in a moment, but I took a little sidetrack. I got distracted for a little bit by a book which I knew existed, but I didn't really pay attention too much to it because I thought it was just the same novel, just with, you know, illustrations in it. But the illustrated version of Salem's Lot, and I wouldn't necessarily call this illustrated. It's got, you know, a couple of photos in it, like basically in between the sections of the book, like the parts, like part 1, part 2. There's maybe 4 or 5 of them throughout the book. I don't necessarily think that would qualify it to be something called illustrated, but I'm trying to, in fact, I'm babbling trying to find, here's another illustration here. But you guys know how much I love Salem's Lot. And the reason I bought this copy is that it contained previously unpublished material from the original novel, like about 50 pages worth that were cut from the original manuscript, and a new introduction by King. And this book also contains the 2 short stories, Jerusalem's Lot and One for the Road, which kind of serve as like a prologue and an epilogue to the novel, which makes this book, you know, pretty much a one-stop shop for anything Salem's Lot related. So I bought it for the deleted scenes. I'm not going to lie to you. I have several copies of Salem's Lot already. The only way I could see buying another copy is if I somehow lucked into a Cemetery Dance edition, which will probably never happen because those books are super expensive and super rare. But this I found on eBay just as I was, you know, looking around at stuff, looking at King-related things. And this book came out, you know, like in the early 2000s, like 2005. And I never knew that it had the deleted stuff in it. So bought it, skimmed through the novel quickly just to look, you know, it over again. Because I you know, this was one of the books that started the reading project. So I didn't do a full reread, but I got to the deleted scenes, and those I focused on for, you know, a good day. And the scenes that were cut were pretty interesting in that King definitely had more of an EC Comics horror vibe going with this stuff that was cut here. If you know what I'm talking about when I make that reference to EC Comics, kind of that super gory, like violent scenes that, you know, because EC Comics came out in the 50s. It was one of the reasons why, you know, comics were censored and put under the comics code for so long. Stuff like that. And for a certain generation of creators, they were hugely influential, and King was one of them. Anyway, I'll say this. The scene, like the two scenes that really seem to affect me most and really kind of grossed me out, was one where Mark and Jimmy Cody, who was the doctor, were they're trying to search out Barlow, and they're trying to search for vampires to kill him. And they go to Ava's boarding house, and in the basement, Jimmy Cody goes down the stairs, Mark is upstairs, and in the basement were nothing but giant rats. I mean, big rats. And they were all over the basement floor. He's shining his flashlight down there. He sees them. He's already like halfway down the steps to the basement. Turns around, tries to run back, and the rats swarm all over him. And Mark, can't really help him because he's literally covered with rats. They're just like biting at him, clawing at him, ripping him up. One even goes in his mouth. And it's a really, even for King, it was a pretty harsh scene. That's a far cry from what was in the actual novel. In the actual novel, the stairs were just cut away. Jimmy doesn't see it, falls down, and there were knives, stuck up on the floor, and he gets impaled on them. The scene with the rats is way creepier, way, there weren't very many rats at all in the original manuscript. In these deleted scenes, there are lots of rats. So, I don't know what the publisher had against rats, but all that stuff was cut out. And just the scene of him getting eaten, and of course, King, he goes into it, and yeah. The other scene that really would have changed things, especially when it comes to the Dark Tower, was the scene where Barlow is facing off against Father Callahan. I don't care about spoilers at this point. This book is so old, and this material's been around for so long. The Father Callahan, he kind of loses faith. He's holding up his cross, and it's shining with that light that King describes in the book. But as Barlow keeps closing in on him and talking, Callahan gets scared, and he loses faith. And, he ends up throwing down his cross. And before Barlow can grab him, Callahan ends up killing himself. Before Barlow could turn him or make him, unclean like he did in the original novel. And he takes away Barlow's, chance to do something bad to, a priest. I didn't see it coming either. I mean, I didn't really know much about the deleted scenes in this book as I was reading it. But, yeah, that was pretty surprising when I read that, and that obviously did not make the final cut. And it would have affected the Dark Tower greatly because, as we know in Book 5 of the Dark Tower, Wolves of the Calla, that's where Father Callahan meets up with Roland and his band of gunslingers. And we find out what happened to him after he left, Salem's Lot. Because I think by the end of the original novel, he's on the bus, leaving town. And, yeah, that would have certainly changed things a lot in the Dark Tower universe if that had stayed true. So there were other scenes here too, like when Ben and Mark, it's the final scene against Barlow where he's in the basement and they discover his coffin. Again, there's rats everywhere, and Ben and Mark have like these squirt bottles, like these sprayer tanks filled with holy water, and they're able to keep the rats at bay and get at Barlow's coffin in order to stake him. That was, different than the original novel. There were other details that were kind of different here and there, like the letter that Barlow leaves, Ben and Father Callahan and Mark and them as they're in the Marston house. In the original novel, it was an actual letter that he wrote. The deleted scene here was actually a tape recording where Barlow is talking to them, through, a hidden tape player, and they can hear his voice. And he says basically the same stuff that he wrote in the letter, but that was just a detail that was changed also. There were a few other things here and there which were kind of interesting, but not as story changing as, Father Callahan killing himself versus Barlow. That was pretty intense. So if you've never read Salem's Lot before, or if you're wondering like which copy to get, I would recommend this one just because it has everything Salem's Lot related to it. So, the illustrated version of this book, I would probably call it semi-illustrated, but I don't mean to harp on that, but it just bugs me. This would be the version to get. Still a great novel, still holds up, and you can see where King wanted to go originally, which to me, like, he hasn't really done this with any of his other books as far as I know, but and I'm not, like I said, I'm not huge on deleted scenes or stuff like that for movies or books, but because this one is so iconic in my mind, it was nice to read and nice to see what could have been. Now, the book that I was reading at the time, I'm still reading now, before I got that Salem's Lot, is the Tommyknockers. And I'm a little more than halfway through. I've been reading this off and on for the last week. I haven't had a lot of time for reading, but I'm kind of struggling with it. The first section of this book, where Bobby finds the spaceship, was pretty interesting. I'm not a big fan of Guard. In fact, I ended up skipping a lot of his section in the book where he's introduced because it runs on for so long, and Guard is such an asshole, to put it bluntly. I didn't really want to spend page after page reading about him. So I skipped a little bit in this book, but for the most part, I've been reading it through. I'm in book 2 right now, where it talks about other people in the town and how they're being affected by the spaceship as it's getting unearthed. It's like giving off these like energy from the ship, and it's making people invent things and see things and hear things, and yeah. I'll probably talk about this in more detail in the next video when I finish it. But I gotta admit, I'm struggling with this one. This book is, it's kind of, it's one of those either love it or hate it type of books. I'm still on the fence. Enjoying most of it, but knowing the backstory on this novel, like this was like King's last novel before he went straight, before he stopped drinking and snorting coke and doing all that stuff, kind of affects his writing because there's like in this one there's more of like a high-pitched energy to it. Like, I don't know, the characters just seem to talk on and on and on and on about stuff. And I'm like 200-300 pages into this thing, and not a lot's happened, and now we're off learning about other people in the town instead of having Bobby and Guard dig out the ship, which I understand that's probably not going to be that exciting to read about. So while they're doing that, we're learning about these people in the town. we'll come back to Bobby and Guard, I'm sure, when the ship is more exposed and dug out, and it'll go on from there. I have virtually no memory of this book when it came out, which is why I put it on the reread list. But some people love this book. Some people say it's their favorite. Others can't stand it. So I will... the jury is still out as far as I'm concerned for my opinion on this book. But I will power through it. I will get to the end soon and move on. But it's not grabbing me the way like Green Mile did, or some of his other more recent novels. So there's that. Of course, his new novel, Billy Summers, comes out in August. I've already got that pre-ordered. I'm looking forward to that. I may, after Tommyknockers, I may take a little break with King until Billy Summers does come out, and read a few other things that have been, collecting up on my shelf. And yeah, I'll probably come back to King with Billy Summers. But that's going to be it for this video. Thank you all for watching. I'll probably make another video once I finish Tommyknockers, and I'll have something pretty cool to show you that's King related by the time I finish Tommyknockers. So until then, I'll just leave you with that little cliffhanger. And yeah, Stephen King rules. Peace, everyone, and I'll see you soon.